I'm Don McGrew with Lakefront TV, and today I'm at the Venetian Center right here in Leesburg, Florida, and this is the 2024 Economic Update. Our special guest presenter is Jennifer Warner from the Florida Realtors. She's the Economist and Director of Economic Development. Today she's going to do a presentation on the economy and housing in the state of Florida and tell us what we can expect for 2024. First, I want to correct Danny Tatro. It's not a housing issue; it's a housing crisis. So I'm going to delete one statistic that I heard this weekend from the government because it's sort of near to Romac building supply. More children are living with their parents today than any point since the 1940s. And the reason why in the 1940s we just came out of Depression or World War, and we had to find housing for all these GIs and these families coming back to work because women work in the factory. And how Romac came to be is Buck Roebuck had a connection with lumber because there was a total lumber shortage in America. So the crisis is real. But it is my honor and privilege today to introduce our guest speaker. Jennifer Warner is the Economist and Director of Economic Development for the Florida Realtors, the largest association in the state of Florida. And Jennifer, I've gotten to know from last year, she did a panel at the Florida Building Material Association that I host for the last 10 or 12 years. And I will say the one thing I really like about Jennifer is she's not an old man economist. A lot of times economists are old, stuffy guys, and their perspective is from the 1960s and 70s. Jennifer actually challenged our group with some new ideas and innovation, saying you need to think about these things instead of the old brick and mortar. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce Jennifer Warner.
So I'm here today to talk to you guys a little bit about housing. You know, when people find out that I'm an economist, one of the first questions I get is, so recession, is that happening? And that was a very popular question last year. And you can see on the screen, this was just Google searches of the word recession. And, you know, it was pretty top of mind for most of last year as the Fed was, tinkering with interest rates starting in mid-2022. People were really worried about how that was going to impact our economy and if it was going to push us into a recession. And so people were really curious about that question. But as time progressed and we got a little bit more comfortable with where we were with interest rates, the concern about recessions kind of fell a little bit. And you can see that, who is Travis Kelce actually became more popular than the recession, which is my way of getting Taylor Swift into this conversation, because as your resident millennial, that's my job, right? If I get pickleball into it, then I win a bet at the office. So I at least got half the way there with bringing Taylor into it. But no, really, the recession was a very big concern, going into 2023. It's less of a concern now in terms of what people are worried about. What people are worried about and ask me a lot about is what's happening to the home buyer. And there's a lot happening to the home buyer right now. And so there's three things that are really kind of pushing against people getting into the market or moving throughout the market. About a year ago, I wrote The Eyes Have It, and at that time it was interest rates and inflation, but I've added another eye to that, which is insurance. And so we're going to dive into all three of these things to kind of really point out what are the headwinds that are facing home buyers. And one thing I want to mention too is, in 2020 through 2022, we saw a huge surge of first-time home buyers getting into the market at that time when interest rates were really low. Even though prices were shooting up, their purchasing power was just really kind of buoyed by that low interest rate environment. Well, now, the first-time home buyer is being really left out of the equation. So when we're talking about home buyers, we're talking about the entire mix, but just remember, the people who are transacting these days are going to be less that first-time home buyer and more the repeat buyer who are, able to use that cash out equity to leverage for their purchases. But the first thing that we have to talk about is interest rates. So this is just a chart showing what was happening with the Fed fund interest rate. You don't need a lecture from me about economics, but basically, you have to remember that the Fed isn't setting the mortgage rate. And so we're going to kind of walk a little bit through why the Fed fund rate matters though. So what's interesting about this chart is just that ladder, and if you look at economic history at all, you never see something like this where things were just getting ratcheted up so quickly and so high, kind of all at once. Normally, this is a little bit more gradual, and that's why it was really impactful coming into the middle of 2022 and 2023, because deals were dying on the vine because of interest rate changes within, a normal purchasing window, which normally doesn't happen. So it was the pace that was really challenging for a lot of people. But again, this is what the Fed was doing, and you see they've been kind of holding steady for a little while. This chart is showing the interplay between the Fed fund rate and the 10-year T-note, which is basically, kind of the proxy for what's happening in the economy overall. And all of that stuff comes together to inform what happens with the 30-year mortgage rate. So that's why we as economists look at the underbelly of what's underneath. And you can see, back in 2020-22, the spread was pretty low between those two things, meaning there wasn't a lot baked on top of what was happening at the Fed level with interest rates. But that spread started to widen as the risk was kind of being felt throughout the market. And so, why does interest rates matter? As an economist, I love that kind of stuff, looking at graphs like that, but most people don't really care about all of that. What they really care about is, what is their monthly mortgage payment going to be? And so this is one of my favorite charts to look at, because the top line is showing what the median sale price was for homes in Florida. And you can see that, we did start to see a run up in mid-2020 when people started transacting again after, the COVID lockdowns ended. And, even though we were seeing month to month really strong gains, it wasn't out of this world, as we were progressing. But if you look at the line on the bottom, the blue, that's the monthly payment. So that takes into consideration the sale price and the interest rate. And it doesn't take too much to see that even though the median sale prices wasn't increasing at an astronomical rate, what it took to service that debt on a monthly basis really started to skyrocket. And that's actually something that we've been really looking at a lot, to be able to understand how it is affecting people's ability to purchase homes. And so this chart that I have, it's kind of hard for me to walk you through it because I can't see it very well, and I have a tiny copy here. But basically what this is looking at is I have to actually, can I move over somewhere to see? Because I want to make sure I'm walking you guys through the chart correctly. Can I take that? Oh, look at, now I get to be like Taylor. Okay. All right. I'm going to go over here because I feel like I had my back to you. I know I'm going off camera, but can you still see me over there? Okay, cool. All right. This is a new chart. That's why I want to walk you guys through it. So basically what we have here, and this is for just Lake and Sumter County, so I didn't do Florida. I wanted to look local for you guys. What I'm looking at here is the per capita income, and this is 2020, 2021, and 2022. So basically what people are earning is the little bar all the way over. And then in the middle is the monthly payment. Again, that's something that we calculate, using what is, the median sale price and the interest rate at the time. And then the last one is the number of closed sales. And you can kind of see how in 2020, the per capita income was going up by about 7%. The monthly payment had kind of come down a little bit. And then closed sales were up 7%. So basically what we're saying is people were earning enough wages, the wages were growing strongly enough, the monthly payment wasn't accelerating, and we had a lot of closed sales. You flash forward to 2022, and that's when the interest rate hikes really started to kick in. So people weren't earning that much more, maybe 2% year over year, but that monthly payment had increased to by about 62%. And that has a direct impact on how many closed sales were taking place at that time. And so you can really start to see that as that monthly payment is kicking up, people aren't really willing to transact. This is another chart that we just kind of made, looks at similar stuff, and now I'm going to go over here. So camera person, I apologize. Moving around a little bit, Anya. So again, this is going to be looking at the mortgage rate, and then the median sale price, and then how that impacted closed sales. And so the little red bar is just showing what the median interest rate was for that year. And then we looked at the median sale price, and we looked at the closed sales. And again, this is just for Lake and Sumter. I want to do something really local for you guys. And you can see back in 2019, interest rates were about 4%. Median sale price had gone up about 6% year over year, and we had about 3% growth in the number of closed sales. So that was like kind of our normal pace, 2018, 2019. But let's again look to 2023, so just last year. Interest rates are at 7%. And so we didn't see much of a change in our sale price, but we did see another year of contraction of the number of closed sales that we had. So we're starting to really kind of look at that correlation between what's happening with interest rates and people's ability to do deals. This last one, and then I'll go back to my station, I promise, is just looking at the payment as a percent of the income. And so you can see based on each year, again, we have the Florida and Lake-Sumter, looking at 2022 specifically, we're exceeding that 30% rule of thumb of how much people are paying each month for housing. And so we've exceeded what we would want to see people doing with their monthly payment. So that's what's happening with interest rates. Now we're going to talk about insurance. So this is a cute little graphic that we recently created. Most of you guys are familiar with the insurance premium data that can come out from the state, right? And all that does though is look at what's happening within the state. It's more timely, like we have stuff that just came out a couple of months ago and can tell us how bad 2023 really was when it came to insurance premiums. But we can't really compare that to anybody else. So we kind of looked at a different data set. We looked at what can come out of the American Community Survey that the Census Bureau puts out. And they put out microdata. I mean, we're mining for everything. And what we did was we looked at how does people's insurance premium payment change over time. And we wanted to look from 2018 to 2022. It's the most recent that we have. And we wanted to look at not only what's happening in Florida, but our sister states that kind of share some of the risk that we do when it comes to hurricanes. And you can see that Florida's in red, and that's not a good thing. Between 2018 and 2022, the amount of money that people are spending every year on their insurance premium went up by about 11.2% in Florida, where it didn't do that other places. And this isn't even capturing 2023, which we all kind of know has been a pretty nasty year for insurance premiums. So the impact of this is a myriad, right? We have people really having a hard time affording those insurance premiums or taking on more risk. People are just dropping, if they own their houses outright, they're just dropping the whole thing altogether and taking on significant financial risk. So for people who migrated to Florida and are now facing these mega bills, they might not be able to stay. And so that's something that we're paying attention to as a potential headwind for what's happening with the migration. And the last one that we always like to talk about is what's happening with inflation. And so again, just to make it really simple, inflation is basically like if you have stuff in your shopping cart, does it cost the same today to purchase everything in your shopping cart as it did a year ago? And when you think about what's in a shopping cart, you're thinking about, food and, clothes and gas and stuff. And that's like the basic shopping cart. And on that level, things have gotten better. But if you take into consideration housing, it has not gotten better. And Florida is uniquely positioned to have a harder time with inflation because of what's happening with our sale prices here in Florida. So inflation has actually been really, really tough for Florida this past year, more so than other parts of the country. This chart here kind of shows a couple of different metros throughout the country who have, been incorporating the housing part into the inflation picture. And we have two major metros that kind of have a higher story than other parts of the country. So because of what's happening in housing, inflation's particularly worse here. And so as I mentioned before, this is definitely impacting people being able to transact. And so I know you're going to see this chart a lot, so I'm going to walk you through it once, and then hopefully when you see it again, it won't be so confusing. So the lines on the left are going to be, just the closed sales by month over, the last couple of years. Really, it's important to pay attention to the bar charts. And so this is the number of closed sales in Florida, and you can see, last year we had a pretty muted year in terms of the number of deals that closed. Compared to the year before where it was a lot stronger, last year felt very painful, especially to realtor members who were doing a lot fewer deals than they're used to. But it's a little bit more in line with what we saw in 2018 and 2019, which we kind of consider to be the normal benchmark that we're comparing things against. So compared to where we were before the sugar high of 2020 through 2022, we're kind of back to normal. But normal doesn't feel right when we recently remember all that cool sugar that we had, right? So it's hard to remember. And there's a lot of people who came into the market during that sugar rush too, who don't remember, because they weren't around, what it was like to have this level of closed sales. So that's going to be a challenge, especially in terms of people continuing to engage in real estate. Just looking at Lake County, similar story. I know it also kind of has the same number, so it's a little bit lower or higher than about 2,000 or whatever the number is, I can't see. But, basically the story is in Lake County, it's been pretty similar, and same thing with Sumter. You guys had a very strong year a couple years ago, though. And then this is just a county map to kind of show what's happening around the state. This is just last year, so you can see, where the pockets of deals were done. It's your typical markets, employment markets. But year over year, there's a lot of, decline throughout the state. But compared to where we were in 2019, it's not as bad. So we always say you can't compare to crazy. And that's what comparing, 2023 to a year before looks like. We try to compare it to something a little bit more rational. So compared to what was considered normal, it wasn't that bad. But still, it feels bad year over year. But I did say there was fewer sales. I didn't say there was no sales, right? It's not like people aren't transacting at all. We do have a lot of strong demand facing Florida. And so this is one of the things that a lot of other state associations can't say, because a lot of places throughout the country are dealing with the same thing. It's not like interest rates are super uniquely bad here, or inflation, well, it is kind of bad here, but there's other places that are dealing with it too. And by the way, Colorado and California, they're seeing a lot of issues with insurance as well. So the one thing that we can say, though, is that we have a lot of people who really want to be in Florida. We have a lot of people who are moving to Florida, who are staying in Florida that otherwise may have left. And then we still have, a lot of international demand. So let's talk a little bit about who's coming here and who's staying here that's kind of helping bolster things up. So as your resident millennial, I will say there's a lot of people who are still doing the whole family thing. This is the age we're at. People think that we're just coming out of college. Newsflash, that was 20 years ago. We're the people who are living in the suburbs. We're driving the minivans. We're having the kids. We're doing the thing. And so we're still forming a lot of households. A lot of people think that we're first-time home buyers. Some of us are, but there's a lot of repeat and upsizing millennials too. It's really that Gen Z that's kind of taken the place of millennials, if you want to think about it. We still have a lot of domestic in-migration, though not as high as it was before. So do you guys remember in 2020 when everybody was on lockdown and Florida seemed like the best place in the world to be because we didn't have the same kind of rules? We had a lot of the untethered worker coming to Florida and going, if I have to work from anywhere, I'd rather be looking at a palm tree than looking at snow, right? And so we had a lot of people who were coming to Florida, and not just people coming to Florida, because that's normally the retiree story. We had a lot of younger people coming. We had a lot of people who were in the prime working ages coming to Florida. We had companies opening up businesses here. We had people putting their kids in the education system here. It was not just, we're going to camp out until COVID passes. People were coming here and really staying. And so we're still attracting a lot of the remote untethered worker, though less so because I think people are getting tethered back again a little bit. But we're still very attractive to people who can still work from anywhere. Retirees are still loving to come to Florida. This is a great place to be for retirees, and so we're not seeing that change. The only thing that we're seeing start to change is their ability to stay here. So people are coming down here with their golden watch on from retirement, but they might not be able to make it last the whole time because of how expensive it's getting here. And we're also seeing the whole baby chasing concept. If you guys aren't familiar, it's grandparents following wherever their kids are and the grandkids are. So if they're here in Florida, that's great. But if they're somewhere else, that's where they're gonna be. And so, we just have a different relationship, I think, within families now where people wanna be around multi-generations. And so that's being more of a draw than just going to a condo in Del Boca Vista or whatever. That's right. So the other thing too is while we can talk about how expensive housing has gotten, we're still pretty cheap compared to other parts of the country. And so if you're coming from California or from New York or from pretty much anywhere, yeah, your dollar doesn't go as far as it used to, but it's still going farther than where you're coming from because housing prices have gotten high everywhere, including Florida, but we were at a low basis going into it. So even if we've gone up 90% in some markets, it's still not as bad as what people are experiencing in other parts of the country. The other thing that's really unique and great about what's happening in Florida, what's been happening over the last 20 years, has been the dynamics in our economy has really shifted. So when I was coming up and going to college, I left Florida because there wasn't the kind of opportunities here that I wanted when I was starting my career. But now people who are coming out of our education system have a better chance of staying because our economy has gotten so diverse and the opportunities that are here are so much more diverse. And so we're having a lot of people who are coming up through Florida systems and staying when they used to not be able to. And people who are coming maybe with an untethered situation where they're remote working might be able to find a similar job in Florida that wasn't there 5-10 years ago, but now we have it. So that's a really interesting thing that's changing in our economy. Let's talk about our population growth. So last year, our population increased by over 300,000 people, and we were only second to Texas. Last year, we were number 1. This year, we're number 2, which is still not a bad place to be. So we're still getting that about 1,000 people a day. If you guys have been around any economists at all, we've all been saying that for a while. So we're still holding that number. We're at about a 1.6% increase year over year. That's only second to South Carolina and just by a little bit. And just throughout the whole country overall, the country overall only grew by about 0.49%. So our 1.6 is very strong. So the Sun Belt is still pulling a lot of people in, and Florida is a big recipient of that. Okay, so where are people coming from? Now this spaghetti map, I know it has a lot going on it. The biggest thing you'll see is that green line on the top that says New York. So New York is still a huge feeder for people in Florida. Is anyone from New York? Anyone? I know got one. Couple of you, yep. So New York is a great place that we pull people down from. Thanks to JetBlue, we can make that trip real quick and easy. The one thing that you can't see very well on this chart is California. So California did not used to be a feeder for us. It's the whole other side of the country thing, and it's similar weather, and we both have Disney, so why bother, right? But Californians are coming to Florida because it's very similar to what they're leaving behind, because we're getting a lot more, amenities that are similar to what Californians want. We have cold brew now, so they're like, okay, as long as there's that, we're good. And we're still on sale. The one thing that California has going against it is how expensive it is to be there. And compared to what's going on there, this is a great place to be. So we're starting to see a lot of that too. The other place that people come from is Texas. Obviously, we pulled down a lot of people from Georgia, but New England, New York specifically, continues to be a big feeder for us. Now, that has been going down, again, year over year, but overall, compared to where we were in 2019, we're still seeing a lot of growth coming from different parts of the country. Like I said, the California one is pretty surprising, but persistent, which is cool. Let me skip through these. I don't need to look at county stuff. Okay, so the other thing that we normally get in Florida is people coming from other countries. You can see that we had a big boon of that coming out of the great financial crisis. That's dwindled off to a little bit more of a normal level before COVID. Then COVID happened and all those restrictions happened. And so we really haven't seen international buying pick back up to where we were before yet. And so we're just kind of waiting and seeing what's going to happen with our international buyers. There's a lot of speculation as to why. One of the things is, money isn't going as far in Florida anymore because prices have gotten higher. They're also competing against domestic immigration. So if you have a condo in Miami, it could be somebody from, Colombia trying to buy it. It could be someone from California trying to buy it, and they both have a lot of cash to do it. So they didn't have that competition a couple years ago. I was just going to skip over some of these. So you can see the major places that people are, the major markets that people are coming into with international buyers are the familiar suspects. We have Miami, Orlando and Tampa and things like that. The biggest draw still is from Canada into parts of Southwest Florida is where they're primarily locating. Now that the restrictions have lifted from, the Canadian government, that's kind of changing. where people are going and how much they can buy. But again, the challenge that they have is the dollar isn't going as far anymore because things have gotten more expensive. So that's a headwind we want to pay attention to. Now, I mentioned employment before. So employment is a huge story for Florida. And you can see in this graph right here, we have on the top in the blue is the change in employment in the United States overall. And this is comparing 2019 to 2023. So we're talking like pre-pandemic to like post-pandemic. What's that recovery period look like? And in terms of total employment in the United States, we had some moderate growth, but in Florida, we've had a phenomenal growth. But it's not just total growth that we're paying attention to, because, you probably think, okay, well, everyone went back to work in their normal service jobs, meds and eds, the normal things that drive the Florida economy, right? And that's partially true. I mean, look at what's happening with education and medical. So again, in the country, moderate growth. I'm trying to pull up my numbers so I can quote them correctly because I can't see that far. This is 40, folks. I have geezer glasses because of that. So in Florida, we've had a lot of growth in the meds and eds, a lot more than what we're seeing in the country. But we're also seeing a lot of growth in finance and insurance. And what's significant about this is it's not just back office, okay? That used to be the story in like Fort Lauderdale and parts of, Central Florida where we would have like financial services, but it was mostly like the number crunchers in the back. Now we're seeing the people on the front, and we're seeing companies like JP Morgan and things like that coming down to Florida, expanding and growing who they're hiring here. And the wages that they're paying at these firms are significantly higher than what is the median income in Florida. We're also seeing a lot more growth in professional services, science, and technology. A lot of that's concentrated obviously in the Space Coast, but it's not just there. We've seen a lot of tech companies coming to Orlando and even parts of Jacksonville. And you can see that the growth in Florida is like way far and beyond what's happening in the rest of the country. So what this means is we're seeing a lot of educated people with really high wage jobs coming to Florida, finding jobs here locally, not just importing them from, New York and California and remote working from here, but they're finding domestically in Florida jobs that are really, really good quality jobs. And that's actually kind of part of the affordability stories because, people are asking, well, if these prices are so high, who's paying for it? It's a lot of those guys that are paying for that kind of stuff. Now, the other thing that we want to talk a little bit about is supply. So supply can kind of come in two ways, right? It's existing stuff going onto the market. It's also people building new properties. And you can see the green line is our single family detached units, so single family houses. And then the blue is going to be like apartment type style houses. And these are permits kind of giving us an indication of where supply is going to be going. And you can see that while we've been pulling out more permits to build more stuff, we're still way below where we were before. And so that's pretty dangerous in terms of being able to create supply from new construction. Putting these two together, you can see that we're a lot higher than we used to be, but again, still we're really below where we've been before. The other thing we need to talk about a little bit is mortgage applications, because there's a little bit of leading indicators that we can pull from that. So up on top is looking at mortgage applications for your typical 30-year mortgage. And you can see we've seen some drop off as closed sales has been dropping off too. And we've seen a little bit of an increase in some adjustable rate mortgages. People having to get a little creative in order to qualify for loans. And so some people are like, oh, are we going to see a foreclosure wave to give us more supply? Hate to tell you, but no. This is the default rate that's happening, and basically we're not seeing foreclosures happening at all, even through COVID and everything else. It just never materialized. So the wave of supply from the foreclosure side, don't expect it, because it's not really in the cards to show up that way. So then the other way that we get new supplies, like I said, is the existing inventory or new listings. And so this is, again, just focus on the bar charts on the side. So you could see new listings last year were still pretty much on par where they were during the sugar high of 2020 through 2022. And then this year, it's starting to fall off a little bit. New listings started to dwindle after interest rates started climbing last year. And so as interest rates were pulling up, or in 2022, as interest rates were starting to pull up that summer, people were getting a little nervous about listing their houses because then they'd have to get locked into whatever the new interest rate would be. And that was a little scary. And so as a result, we've seen new listings kind of pull off as interest rates continued to climb. And so that's why where we are this year is, we don't really have a lot of new inventory that's coming on the market compared to years before. Let's see, I'll just get you guys through this. Okay, so this is what was happening in Lake County. So again, you guys have had a similar trajectory, fewer new listings coming on the market last year compared to where we were in the years before. But again, more on line with trend with your own history, and same thing with Sumter County as well. Okay, active listings. This is an important one to look at because it's what's left over on the market. Now, without getting into all the dynamics of how it works, you're only new once. So new listings is like the kind of the pipeline of new inventory that's going to go on the market. Active inventory is what's left over after everybody snatches things up. And you can see that really big dip in 2020 and 2021. That's because anything that went on the market got snatched up immediately. I'm sure you guys have a story similar to mine where I put my house on the market. Friday morning, I had 4 offers that afternoon. And that's how quickly things were going back then. And so there wasn't much active inventory because there wasn't much left over after everybody ate everything that came out. Well, now we're starting to see that rise up a little bit because people are putting their houses on the market, but they're not flying off the way that they used to. And so we're seeing a little bit more slack in the market, which is giving buyers a little bit more of an advantage in the situation, whereas before it was the seller's price, end of story. And you had to compete very aggressively to get a property. Now it's not that way. Sellers are starting to offer concessions. They're starting to have to realize it's not going to take, a weekend to sell their house. It's going to take a month or two. And so that's a really different dynamic. And you can see that it is different by property type. So that we're seeing a lot more slack on the market for single family than we are for townhouses and condo. A lot of that has to do with price point, right? Single family homes tend to be more expensive. And so we have, buyers with diminished purchasing power. So they're kind of opting to go to the townhouse and condo route because it's more affordable. And single families are taking a little bit longer. Let's see. This is just kind of showing where we are relative to our own history, though. So as much as I'm saying buyers have a little bit more power, we're still, considered a seller's market on both sides. So 6 months of inventory is kind of what we would consider a balanced market. And so even though, we're seeing a little bit more slack in the market and we're edging towards more of a balance, we're still, in a position where we have way too many people trying to buy houses than there are in the market. There's not enough new supply and there's not enough people who are listing to create existing inventory. And so we're still kind of feeling that pressure overall. When we put all of our property types together, you can see, again, we're still kind of on a limited situation. The one thing that we like to look at is price tier. So we're able to break up all the different houses that sell based on price tier. And you can see that when it comes to $1 million plus properties, that's been a buyer's market for a while now because there's not a lot of them and there's not a lot of buyers for them. And so those deals tend to take a lot longer to close anyway. On the more affordable stuff, it's a little bit faster. But again, you try finding what we considered an affordable house, it's really difficult to find. And so whatever is put onto the market will go pretty quickly. So what does this have to do with anything that matters? It all comes down to price. If you guys have sat through any economics class, the supply and demand dynamic. When you have too few of something and you have a lot of people who want it, prices are going to go up. And that's exactly what's been happening. We were coming out of the great financial crisis. We didn't see, huge price appreciation at that time, but we have been seeing it, a lot, obviously, in the time coming out of that. Most acutely, we saw it, coming out of the recovery of the pandemic. We're starting to see that slow down, and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. So we're not seeing 20% growth in prices, but we're also not seeing a decline either. It's like we've hit this high water mark, and then it hasn't come back down. And so we're still seeing a little bit of appreciation, but we're appreciating at a higher level. And so that's what's kind of creating the issue. So let's look at the median price of closed sales, and this is a fun looking layer cake. Obviously it's, each year is a different color. And you can see that coming from 2018 and 19 to where we are now, it's a 52% increase in prices throughout the state of Florida. Some markets are worse. Some markets like Naples, it's like I said before, like 90%. And so it's pretty aggressive what's happened over the last couple of years. Year over year, if you just look at the year over year number comparing 2023 to 2022, you're like, oh, 3.8%, that smells about normal. But that's, normal compared to where we were before. The median sale price in Florida is $410,000. Before it was way less. Let's look at what's happening in Lake County. So very similar between 2018 and 2019 up to where we are today. It's been a 58% increase. Where we are today is $385,000 for a median sale price for a single family home. In Lake County, same thing, 48%. You actually saw a decline year over year in Lake County by about 2.6%, and $370,000 is your price. But still, it's a lot different than it used to be. So the last thing I'll kind of comment on is what that's looked like for the overall market and what it means for, just the size of our industry. And so dollar volume is going to multiply that median sale price with the number of closed sales. And if you guys have kind of tracked what I've been saying, we've seen fewer closed sales, right? But we've also seen each deal being more expensive. And so what we've been seeing in terms of dollar volume is dollar volume's been able to stand pretty tall because of how expensive things are. And so you can see, 2023, when we were looking at the end of the year, we had a very strong year last year in terms of overall size of the pie throughout the state of Florida, way more than what we saw in the normal years of 2018 and 2019. And that's because of the impact of the sale price. So you can see where we were last year compared to the year before. Now this is the impact of the fewer closed sales, right? We're still seeing high prices, but we're not seeing as many sales. So dollar volume is contracting, but we're still way, way, way above where we were in the normal years. And so for the realtors who are able to get deals done, they are more lucrative, but they're harder to get. And so that's the challenge that we're facing in the market today. When you look at it by county, obviously you can see, the biggest markets are going to be the ones where there's going to be the higher price sales. So the Miamis, the Naples, parts of Orlando and Tampa. Looking year over year, you're seeing obviously a lot of, contraction year over year. And this is where I kind of like to end with, but looking at where we were back in 2019, the dollar volume is significantly higher than where we were before. And so hopefully that gives you guys some insight into what's happening in our economy. And I'm happy to take questions if you have any, Don.
Ran across this statistic the other day, and it was brought up earlier today, about adult children that had moved in with their parents. And I thought I heard them say 60% of the households in the U.S. now are experiencing that phenomenon. Is that anywhere near accurate?
I don't know, but I anecdotally am totally hearing it. And it's also, if you don't have familial wealth, good luck getting a down payment. Because where are you going to pull together? My brother's trying to buy a place up in New York. I don't know we're going to find $100,000 for a down payment. And so that's why people end up having multi-generational housing. And that's why Florida is kind of an attractive place if the kids can get jobs here and the parents want to be here too. Because everyone's kind of having to band together in order to afford what's going on in the market today. Anybody else? Yeah.
One metric we didn't mention there or talk about was taxes.
Yeah.
Which as our values have gone up, those that had to save our home are protected. But investment properties and things like that have seen those numbers skyrocket, which in turn affects rents.
Yep. Yeah, we don't have a ton of transparency into the taxes, so we don't really report on it. But anecdotally, I can tell you we've had to raise the rent on our rental houses too, because our taxes went up and it has to go somewhere, right? Otherwise, we're subsidizing housing. And so, we see that showing up in rents going up. It's not just, because demand is strong so we can get that kind of rent. It really comes down to how much people are having to pay for taxes and insurance, the other side of the PITI, right? Any other questions? Yeah.
So you brought projections up to 2023. How do you see the market going forward, or even this year?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because 2024 is going to be kind of an interesting year to watch. There's a couple of things that we have going on. So we have a really strong economy when it comes to employment. If you guys paid attention to the jobs report that came out first Friday of this month, it was very, very strong, much stronger than economists were projecting. And that's giving the Fed a little bit more faith in their plan of keeping interest rates high. Everyone keeps guessing when is the Fed going to pull back and start cutting rates. And it all comes down to whenever they feel like they've hit their goal, right? And the market is showing and the economy is showing that it's able to weather this high interest rate environment at least for a little bit longer. And so we are expecting the Fed to start, cutting rates maybe at some point this year, but we can't predict when. And then how far it's going to take to impact mortgages is going to be a little bit longer, since those tend to lag one another. So that's one thing we're paying attention to, is what's happening with Fed and what's happening with employment. The other thing too is it's an election year, and so it doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you're on, election years are weird for the economy, and the economy doesn't like any sort of uncertainty. And this election, like it or not, is going to be a very weird one. And weird does not mean good things when it comes to an economy who likes certainty. And so we expect, to have a strong summer like we normally do in terms of economic growth and all these different things, and then to kind of be in the typical election year holding pattern during Q3 when we try to figure out what's going on in the election. And that might last a little bit longer this time, just depending on how the election turns out. So that's what we're paying attention to, is employment and how the Fed feels about it, and then it just being an election year, knowing that it's going to be weird. The one thing that we've been given in 2023, even though we don't like it, is interest rates are high, right? But they've been high for a while. The Fed is not ratcheting things up the way they were before. And that's giving the market at least certainty. It's not a certainty we like, but at least we know where we're at. And a lot of people are starting to feel pretty confident that the interest rate hikes are more or less behind us. And so that's giving people some confidence that at least they're not going to be getting into a market where things are going to keep increasing over time. Now that may make, a buyer feel like, okay, well, if I buy today, at least I'll have some confidence that I can refinance sooner rather than later, because interest rates will start to go down. And we might see some of that, but obviously, refinance activity is pretty much non-existent right now. And like I said, mortgages are pretty low too. So we have to kind of see how that's going to play out over 2024, but I don't think it's going to be worse, hopefully. Yeah.
In your net migration number, how do you guys account for the immigration that's happening across the border? Is that number calculated in there? And that definitely affects housing.
Yeah, you're right. So the question was, how do we account for people coming in from across the border or even illegal immigration? Obviously, we can't count that, and we don't really account for that either. The data that we mostly look at for our migration numbers is going to be driver's license data. It's going to be, we were even looking at van lines data, like who's, hiring a moving company to move. And then we rely on the Census Bureau, and whatever official numbers that we get from the Census Bureau is how we account for that. So I'm not sure how they account for all that kind of stuff, but I do know that things like, different laws that have been passed in Florida that make it a little bit nerve-wracking for people who are undocumented to be here has definitely impacted businesses. I'm not sure necessarily how that's been impacting housing, though. Any other questions? Yeah?
Sorry if I missed the slide. Has there been any increase in the amount of homes purchased in cash?
Oh yeah, so we do track cash. We didn't show it on this one, but I'm glad you brought it up, because before coming out of the great financial crisis, about 40% of deals were done all cash. That started to dwindle down as the world got back to normal after that. We've settled in about 30% of deals being done in cash. We know that upticked a little bit in, coming out of COVID when we were having all that competition. The thing that was weird about that time, though, is it was masqueraded cash. Not all of it was real cash. There was a lot of financial technology companies that were coming out at the time that made you look like you could have an all-cash offer, but there was a mortgage underneath. And so that gave us a little bit less confidence in what was being reported as cash, but because we had no way of knowing really what percentage of the deals done were that way, but we heard it a lot. So the thing about cash is cash can be indicative of distress, which is how it was during the great financial crisis, or it can be indicative of competition or a really hot market. And that's kind of what it was last time. Most recently is, people were doing cash to get deals done because they really wanted the property and they were trying to win out bidding wars. Now, most recently, in the last 18 months, cash is going to be people who are going to be trying to avoid interest rates. And that's a very select, group of people who are able to do an all cash offer to get out of the interest rate issue. And that's going to be, people who have cash out equity from either another state, or they sold their big house that they raised their family in and now they're buying something smaller and can do it in all cash. We're not really seeing that in the first time home buyer side of things. We're also not seeing as many investors playing in the market either because the basis is just too high. Even if they're coming in all cash and are able to get properties cheap, it's still much higher than it was before, and the numbers just don't work for a flip the way it used to. Any other questions? Yeah.
Quick question. You mentioned the employment situation and you referenced non-farm employment. One of the things that some of us are troubled about, the household survey employment month over month was down for the second month in a row. What do you think that means?
About household formation? Or
The household survey employment numbers, table A1.
so you're talking about like the total employment, like not just the.
Yes, yeah.
I haven't actually been looking at that because mostly we just look at the non-farm employment because that's a bigger part of the rest of the state. But I guess here in these counties, right, the farm employment's stronger. Is that right?
I'll catch you.
Okay.
Table A1 is household survey. Basically, where do you live? Do you have a job?
Yeah.
And then that's what unemployment is calculated from.
Oh, you're talking about that.
And then non-farm is establishment survey companies report.
Right.
Forgive me, I'm a student of Brad's.
Okay, got it. Yeah. I was like, this seems like something Brad would talk about. Because, yeah, we look at, I see what you're saying now, too. You're not talking about ag versus everybody else. You're talking about whether you report you have a job or whether ADP reports you have a job, right? Yeah. Let's catch up on that afterwards. That's like exactly the weeds that I like to play in, but I don't know if everybody else wants to join us. Are there any other questions? Go for it.
Regarding the foreclosure inventory, as you see, there's a huge anomaly in regards to the lack of foreclosure happening. And do you have data to where you have access to from the servicing world where they're holding a lot of it on the books because it's securitized? And so, because I mean, March 20, second half of the year, the whole economy was down. And from that point on, there was a lot of forbearances and things like that. And that's not being related or talked about. And so there's a huge discrepancy in that foreclosure.
That's true. So the question is basically, there's the official foreclosure numbers that we report, and then there's stuff where it's like, it's kind of on the books, but it hasn't hit yet. And the question is there like a shadow, right? Is that kind of where you're going at?
Yeah, 9-day and above.
Right. So we track the 90-day and above, and the thing is a lot of that stuff gets resolved before it ends up in foreclosure. And the biggest reason why is because of all the lessons that we learned through the great financial crisis. I mean, things are not leveraged the way that they were back then, and so, people who purchased homes were actually qualified to purchase them this time as opposed to last time. And so, and lenders are able to kind of make those things work a little bit easier than they were last time when it was just bananas. So that's why we say, we don't really anticipate a huge wave of foreclosure inventory kind of shifting the market around because we're just not leveraged the same way we were last time. Even if there is a shadow, I don't think it's going to be showing up in the way that people are hoping from a supply side. Any other questions? Yeah.
You kept referring to high interest rates, and I think back to something more normal.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. The question was, aren't these interest rates relatively normal? Like, why are we kind of getting sad about not having 2% and 3%? We're only sad because that was really cool, wasn't it? We have a lot of property that are leveraged at that rate, and it's wonderful. You're right, like 7% is not abnormal. What's abnormal is how quickly we got there and how it shocked the system so quickly. And when you couple that with what's happened with the sale prices, it's like a double-edged, or not even double-edged sword, it's a double whammy, right? So people are feeling it in their purchasing power being diminished by the higher interest rates, and then they're facing a level of prices that have never been seen before in Florida. I mean, what I'm showing you might sound normal if you're from California or parts of New England where those prices still seem pretty cheap, but for Florida, we've never seen a median sale price for the state of Florida start with 4, ever. And so if you're coming into that kind of market with this kind of interest rate, then the number that you're putting into your monthly budget is way higher than it used to be. And while Florida is, seeing stronger wages and incomes than we did before, it's still not quite in line with what we need to be able to afford that. So the disconnect is really what's the issue. So yeah, interest rates are high, and we've seen high interest rates. We've never seen prices like this before. And so when you put that together, it's really, really difficult for people. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys.
From foundation to rooftop, romance got you covered.